Right now, on nearly every continent on Earth, there's an ancient story about a flood that destroyed almost everything, and only a handful of people survived. The Bible has one, Mesopotamia has one, ancient China has one. Indigenous cultures across the Americas, Australia, and the Pacific Islands all have their own versions, often with strikingly similar details, despite these civilizations having no contact with each other whatsoever. So why does nearly every human culture on the planet tell the same basic story? Let's start with the most famous version. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written stories in human history, dating back roughly 4,000 years in ancient Mesopotamia, a man named Utnapishtim is warned by a god to build a boat before a massive flood destroys humanity. He loads the boat with his family and animals of every kind, survives days of relentless rain, and eventually sends out birds to check if the floodwaters have receded. This story predates the biblical flood narrative involving Noah by well over 1,000 years, and the similarities between the two are almost impossible to ignore. But this pattern doesn't stop in the Middle East. In Hindu mythology, a man named Manu is warned by a fish, later revealed to be the god Vishnu, to build a boat before a catastrophic flood arrives. In Chinese mythology, the story of Gunyu describes a great flood so severe that it took decades and multiple generations of effort to finally control it. Norse mythology describes a flood of blood from a slain giant that drowned nearly all other giants, with only two managing to escape. Indigenous Hawaiian, Aboriginal Australian, and numerous Native American traditions all describe their own catastrophic flood events, often involving a warning, a vessel or safe place, survivors, and some kind of animal that signals when the danger has passed. So how do civilizations with zero contact end up telling nearly identical stories? There are a few competing explanations, and scientists still debate which one carries the most weight. The first theory is straightforward. Floods are common. Rivers overflow. Coastal areas flood. Heavy rain seasons devastate entire regions. Nearly every ancient civilization settled near water for survival, which meant nearly every ancient civilization also experienced catastrophic, life-altering floods at some point in their history. A flood devastating enough to wipe out most of a community would understandably become the most significant story that culture ever told, passed down for generations as a warning and a lesson. The second theory is far more specific and, frankly, more compelling. Around 14,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, massive glaciers began melting rapidly across the planet. Global sea levels rose by more than 100 meters over several thousand years, permanently submerging entire coastlines that early humans had been living on. One particularly dramatic event, known as Meltwater Pulse 1A, may have caused sea levels to rise by several meters in just a few centuries, an almost unimaginably fast change on a geological timescale, but potentially fast enough to be witnessed and remembered within a single human lifetime. Some researchers specifically point to the flooding of the Black Sea around 5,600 BCE, when rising Mediterranean waters may have breached a natural barrier and flooded an enormous freshwater basin with catastrophic speed, displacing entire populations who lived along its ancient shoreline. If this event happened the way some geologists propose, survivors would have scattered in every direction, potentially carrying the same core memory of the disaster into completely different, unconnected cultures across the region. A third theory focuses less on any single historical event and more on human psychology itself. Floods represent one of the most universally destructive natural disasters a community can survive, unlike a localized fire or an earthquake, and the water itself becomes an obvious, ready-made symbol for divine punishment, moral cleansing, or a complete reset of civilization. Multiple cultures may have independently reached for water as the ultimate destructive and purifying force, without ever needing to share an original flood story or a genuinely shared collective memory at all. The honest answer is that we don't fully know for certain which explanation carries the most weight, and it's entirely possible all three are true simultaneously, working together rather than competing against each other. Real ancient floods happened repeatedly across human history. Rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age genuinely reshaped coastlines humans were living on in real time. And water genuinely does carry deep symbolic power in nearly every human culture that has ever existed on Earth. So the next time you hear a flood myth from a completely different culture than your own, and notice how familiar the basic structure feels, remember that you might be looking at something remarkable, a memory, a metaphor, or an actual shared trauma, echoing forward across thousands of years in completely disconnected civilizations, all converging on the exact same ancient story.